Alright, this should be a quick video. No drama really, just on the subject of this DMCA thing, and it's really irritating because no one really understands this law. Now, the way the law is to work is that the burden is always on the copyright holder, which is a problem, because they're the ones that have to initiate any legal action under the DMCA. So, how this really got broken was when YouTube broke the rules. See, the whole point of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was to take the people providing content, the people who weren't scrutinizing content, and force the responsibility off of them, so they weren't legally responsible for every asshole they gave the right to broadcast to, and put it on the assholes who were doing the broadcasting. So their obligation was to have secure accounts to people that can be essentially gotten to legally. So you have a legal right to be able to contact the account holder, and that's the obligation YouTube has under the law. Its obligation to be immune to prosecution for the content it displays is that it just has to have ID information for the users and that provide a person a legal option. But it's still the copyright holder who has to initiate the legal action under the DMCA, and people keep fucking this up. And so this is the way it's supposed to work. So YouTube would be immune to prosecution or liability for what its users did, but the users would be liable for what they did. And YouTube's obligation was, when a DMCA is filed under the law, it takes the content down temporarily to give the person who published the content the option of conceding they have violated the copyright and take the content down voluntarily, or to protest and say, no, I am fairly using it. Now, if they say they're fairly using it, that's a legal statement, essentially, and now they can be sued for all damages. So once they say, I'm doing something legal, then they're responsible. But they're only responsible in the sense that the copyright holder has the burden. He still has to drag them to court. So Brett Keane doesn't understand this after all this time. I mean, all these 10 years of this shit, and he still doesn't understand. I mean, listen to this part. This is what people think.
I've grown tired of the bullshit. All I gotta do is just click the button, fill out the information, and it's that simple.
No, it's not. And it says right in the information, do not make false claims. And it's a false claim if you don't intend to protect your copyright. That means, by intent means, when they file their counter notice, you're obligated to sue them. You're obligated. You're not just like, I have the discretion, I can decide if I want to. No, you made in your initial statement, you swore that you believe your copyright's being violated. You are essentially swearing that I'm going to take you to court if this content stays up. That's essentially what you're saying when you file a DMCA. So when you file a DMCA, you have to know that you're right, and that if they continue to publish your content, you will sue them. Not that you might sue them, you will. And that means you have to file the case, which means you have to, at minimum, I mean, if you file it yourself, you have to get up to speed on all the forms, and everything has to be written a certain fucking way on these papers. And you have to pay, in federal court, $400 just to file the papers, just to initiate the process. I've been there and done this, so I know how it works. And I also had to read the law before I did it. That's how I knew this is how it works. So I'm just saying that there is no, you don't have any right to sit there and file a DMCA and then force them to sue you. Because now they're going to sue you for maliciously using the DMCA, in a sense, which you are doing, because essentially you swore that you intended to protect your copyright. Not that you intended to censor, that you intended to protect. And that's a huge difference, and you're fucked if you're going to play this game. So unless you intend to protect your copyright in court, that's what the copyright holder has to do. See, this is where YouTube fucked it up, because it gave Sony and all of the big corporations, because YouTube censored content for the big companies, it did it for them. They didn't have to sue, right? Because YouTube automatically takes it down permanently, and it gives you a strike. So if you steal some Sony shit, there's no court, there's no... the process is completely what YouTube is doing is completely illegal. But again, you can't sue Google. You can't fight these assholes. They're breaking the law. They're breaking the intent of the law by doing pre-censorship. As soon as they involve themselves in manipulating the content, they basically are now legally responsible, in my opinion. So the person you really should be suing is Google, because technically Google is only protecting Sony's content and it's not protecting our content preemptively without a court process. So Sony doesn't have to pay to go to court to stop me from publishing Sony material, where I have to go to court to protect my material. See, you get it? This is what's broken about the law. But the explicit law, I mean, if you get a stickler judge, and you know, Sotomayor might be in trouble in the sense that, yeah, he filed the DMCA, they counter-noticed, and he didn't sue. And it was his obligation to protect his copyright. It just doesn't work the other way around. The person stealing the content doesn't have to go to court, doesn't have to sue. The person protecting the content has to initiate the lawsuit. I mean, it is a pain-in-the-ass burden. I mean, that's why Sony and all the companies got together with YouTube to protect their content, because they didn't want to have to go to court, because it cost a huge amount of money for a tiny return. You know, the infraction is worth almost no money, so they don't get any real damage money from the perpetrator, and they have to spend a bunch of money with their lawyers doing paperwork for 6 months to even get the case heard. If they're lucky, it gets heard in 6 months. That's if you're lucky. And you get a rational judge. So, I mean, it could cost Sony up to $4,000 or $5,000 every time they attempt to protect their copyright. And you can understand that if they're only getting $50 back, that's not a very good return on their investment. And so Google broke the law. Google's breaking the law. But you're going to break the law if you file a DMCA and you don't have your $400 ready and your legal forms ready. When I filed my DMCAs, I always had my papers ready. So if I got a counter notice that said fair use on it, you know, if somebody counter noticed me, then I was ready. But the only person that counter noticed me was Joneser, and eternally undenying whatever it was. And so yeah, I sued them. I did what the law requires. I paid for a court. I initiated it. And then 2 years later, I won an appeal because I couldn't even get the judge to make a fucking decision. I won a federal appeal. But that's what it took 2 years to win an appeal saying that, yes, I have a right to have my case heard. And I still didn't get the case damn heard. Because the system doesn't give a shit about us. It doesn't give a shit about the law. So I'm going to say, I wish you all luck, but you won't get anywhere. You know, because the court doesn't give a shit, and it certainly doesn't want to analyze what's going on, because if it does analyze what's going on, it's going to find Google in violation of the law, and they're never going to do that. So, but yeah, Brett, yeah, you're going to make a big mistake if you go ahead and file 30 DMCAs and you haven't got your legal papers ready. You're making a big fucking mistake, buddy. It's your obligation to protect your copyright. And I know that doesn't sound fair, that somebody you got to pay money to take the criminals to court, but that's the system. And you're fucked. You're not Sony, and Google ain't going to protect you. So you have to do it. And that's the way it is. But if you have this attitude that I can just file DMCA notices, and then I can get the counter response, which is fair use, and that you don't have to do anything else, well, that's breaking the law. You have to take them to court. That was what you swore to when you signed your DMCA. Read your DMCA. It says right there in the bottom, you intend to protect your copyright. That has to be your intent. And if you don't, protected. If you don't go to court, then what you swore to was bullshit. So, don't let your mouth write a check you can't pay. Yeah.